Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hannick here with co-host Mario Ramos Reyes. Our good friend Christopher Zender is with us as well. But today's special guest is Mr. Amar Patel, the American Solidarity Party candidate for Vice President of the United States. We'll be discussing the party's campaign with him. As always, though, we begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Let us pray, Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful. In the same Spirit, help us to relish what is right and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Why don't we start by asking our special guest, Amar Patel, if you could, Amar, tell us what drew you to the American Solidarity Party.
Sure. So years ago, I actually was not born and raised Catholic, and when I converted to the faith in college, it happened to coincide with the Clinton-Bush election of '92, and which also happened to be my first election. So I turned 18 that year, the previous year actually. So I had my first chance to vote, and I was, very actively studying the Gospels, the Catechism. I had a lot of, I was involved in Bible study and so forth, and so learning a lot about the faith. And I think the biggest thing politically that drove me at that time was the issue of abortion and life. And so at the college campus, the climate for Catholics generally was a very pro-life position, and so we were obviously against President Clinton and for President Bush. And it was while there was a defeat of the pro-life candidate happened, I think that really fueled my political activity at the time, because then we were doubly pushing for advocacy for pro-life causes on campus. And so I think, coming into that environment, really looking back at it as a more mature person and seeing in hindsight, it really dragged me into this kind of Republican mentality where, I'm not sure if you have seen me write things, and I'll say this pretty often, that it's a form of Stockholm syndrome where you get pulled to a party or another based off of your passion for an issue that is righteous, and then you get drawn into kind of with the people that have captured you, and you have this tribal mentality of absorbing their other political traits that may not be as savory. And so this kind of went on for years and years. And, as I found myself as a very pro-life person, there would be many times where I would get questioned by even fellow Catholics about, positions that I felt like I had to defend, or like the wars that I was not comfortable with, but because a Republican president had dragged us into these wars, and we had been forced to think of the war on terror as like a holy quest almost, if you had been conditioned that way, that even though it's uncomfortable with it, it's almost like I felt like I had to do that in order to maintain that life position, and maybe family values or religious freedom, a couple of other things that I felt were very right. And then, but the treatment of the poor and the vulnerable, I never was comfortable with that. And so when the election of 2016 rolled around, and I had just this almost, it was just a very unsavory character of President Trump running as a Republican, and equally so the Clinton campaign, and just their attitude towards people of faith, specifically Catholics. I was kind of politically homeless. And so as the election drew closer and closer, I kind of just had to stay out of it and just feel like there was just no good answer. I had made some comments on a political Facebook group, and I think it was Tai Chi Kuo that reached out to me and said, "Hey, you live in Illinois. There's this American Solidarity Party thing." And I looked it up, and I was like, "This is amazing," And he said, "Well, let's get together." And really, the rest is history. I mean, we met a couple days later. He called me back and said, "We're looking for an officer at large in the Illinois committee." And then not too many months after that, he asked me to run for national committee. And that night, I actually ran almost as a lark, to just have more voices in the race. And when he called me that night, so I made my vote, and I kind of followed some of the convention proceedings. But that Sunday night, I was just hanging out with my family and just figured that whole part of my phase of my political activity was over. And even though I was, committed to the Solidarity Party, it was, it wasn't something that I was even planning on doing too much more with, unless I had locally, I think would have been my pursuit. He called me and said, "Hey, we won," and I don't even know. I can't even tell you what my thoughts were at the time. They were just a flurry of insane emotions, and just wow. I think the Lord does that in many ways in my life. Has kind of said, "Well, it looks like you're doing this now," which was never on my radar. I'm not sure if you've heard, but I actually wrote a novel, a Catholic novel, and it was almost exactly that same storyline as where I was just in prayer at Mass one day, and I got this call. "Hey, you're going to write this novel." And I was like, "Come on, you need to find somebody else." And he's like, "No, it's going to be you." So this kind of things that happen.
Amar, that Christopher Zender is another novelist.
Oh, really?
So we are two novelists we have here.
Wow.
Fantastic. We should exchange novels. I'll have to
do that, yeah.
send you a link, and
Yeah, we'll do that.
Maybe,
that'd be good.
Yeah, cool. Very cool.
Well, now that you're in the thick of it, absolutely in the thick of it, how are you going to forget that hanging out with the family? What are your challenges as you try to balance family life and work and, good grief, politics?
I would say,
them, or is it just a matter of balancing them?
Yeah, it's very. People ask me all the time, how I find the time, and at the same time, they'll, when I reciprocate and say, "Well, can you see yourself giving some more time to political pursuits? Could just be writing or editing or something that could be helpful." And a lot of people say, "I just don't have time." And my response to that is, for me, well, and I can only say personally. I mean, I don't know how other people would react, but when I consider that, some of these things have, I've prayed about a lot of the stuff. When I ran for national committee, I felt like it was what I needed to do at that moment, at that time in prayer. And when I won, actually I do remember one thing, because that was in like late June, that when I won, my first thought was, there goes my summer. Like now I know what I'm going to be doing all summer, because at the time I did not have any big plans. As a teacher, I have more free time during the summer. And so, but the thing I would say is, I feel like it's like loaves and fishes, that when you give time, meaningful time to something that you were meant to do, that time seems to multiply. So, even as I accomplish things, tasks and goals that I want to accomplish within the party, and, within the campaign, I feel like there's still other time that I could be spending on good works. There's still time that I feel like, and I do get to spend time with my kids. In fact, today I just got back. I've seen all my daughter's tennis matches in the fall. I've seen all my son's bowling matches this winter season, and in the spring they both have sports, and I hope to make most of those too. So it's like family time. I've been able to see my kids' things. We get to hang out as a family and so forth. But there's not a lot of just downtime. Like, I'll have my computer with me when we're watching a movie, or not directly interacting, but we'll all sit in the room, like when the kids are doing homework. I'll be working on things. So it isn't, wouldn't be, like we're out at a picnic and I'm doing party work, but stuff gets done on the sly sometimes. Like I'll just throw an email here, or a Facebook message at someone, or make a post, and no one even knows that I'm doing it in my family. We're just sitting around together, but doing our own business.
Well, now Mario is an older and wiser person, and yet a teacher still.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions that you think that Amar should be reviewing at this point? I mean, there's the obvious question, like how does he get by without sleep? But apart from that.
So I heard that you are a teacher.
Yes, I teach math.
At the same time, I learned that you have strong tech skills. My question is, how did you come by them?
Yeah, so in college, I was at the University of Illinois right when the internet, Mosaic was like the first internet search tool, which eventually turned into Netscape, and then Internet Explorer and all these things. And so we were making web pages even back then, and that was part of my graduate school work, was making rudimentary web pages, lessons on the internet. It was a very novel thing. So I had a lot of time put into kind of developing those skills on the computer. And then the district I work in, one of the culture that we're part of is everyone makes their own materials, like their own tests, their own quizzes. Even though publishers will release materials to teachers for use, it's always been the practice in my department that people would make their own stuff. So, having to make your own worksheets in Microsoft Word, drawing things in Paint or some other drawing tool, Photoshop, for example, I just had to keep teaching myself, how to use these things so I could be effective in the classroom. And I've taught computer programming for many years. And so even through that process of coding in several languages, you kind of pick up on things you didn't think you would need, at the beginning of the year, but on the fly realized that, hey, this is going to be useful. And then ever since Facebook came out, Facebook and Twitter and all the different tools that you can use, I've just, once you learn some things, I mean, it kind of, scaffolds into new technologies, and basically it's all the same, with the way things are menu driven. So I think that's where a lot of that stuff comes from.
So,
according Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just a follow-up question. So
Yes.
if technology is very important and virtual image is very important, do you think that dynamic of what politics is have changed over the past 5, 10 years?
Yeah, I think, for sure, the discourse, because of Facebook, and I think people have said that, and then actually there's a lot of misconception out there in the public of how the Russians, when they say that the Russians, affected our last election. It wasn't like they went into the voting booths and changed votes or anything, but it was more the way that we interact with each other and how we, learn information about the political system, about our candidates, about issues even, has become so influenced with technology. One of the things that I've researched first as vice chair, now as chair, and doing the campaign, is that, what we would call like memes or just visual images on Facebook get 10 times the amount of attention than like a well-written article, right? Or a lengthy post where there is no picture and it's just someone explaining, a deeper principle or something of that nature. So, which is a shame, right? But that's just the nature of how human beings, are wired these days. Pardon the pun, but like the technology of not the technology, but this is just the aspect, the psychology, I should say, of social media and memes and quick videos and punchy slogans. It really changed how we can attract new people into like what your particular point of view and whatnot.
Christopher, does that worry you? By the way, Amar, I got to tell you that Christopher writes textbooks, but never mind that.
I write anti-textbooks. Let's make a distinction.
Should we play the meme game, Christopher, or are we selling our souls?
Well, we're probably selling our souls to some extent, but you do have to, it seems to me, you do have to deal with people as they are, as long as you can find some way of drawing them to better things.
Absolutely.
You have to get people's attention, and I think doing so, as long as it doesn't stop there, and that's, so much of modern politics, it just stops there. It stops at meaningless phrases. But, it seemed to be the task would be, if we're actually going to recover real politics, is to draw people from that superficial level to something deeper. I'm not sure exactly how you do that, but that'd be something perhaps the party could actually think about.
Oh, I totally agree. I think one of the things that I wrote up this is many months ago, a plan of trying to transition people from social media, and the difficulty of that plan, it really goes back to my original point of time. And I think James mentioned, what about balancing time? And I think one of those things is that we can draw someone's attention as a Facebook page, like the American Solidarity page or the Brian Carrol for ASP 2020 page can catch someone's imagination and their attention, but it really takes a person and their personal touch to take them to that level that Christopher's talking about. And that commitment, I think when I've asked people, hey, can you give this much time? And really the ideal situation would be face-to-face, right? If we're going to break people of this technical fallacy, then you kind of have to reverse it to, it has to be a personal truth.
But may I ask a question regarding that? Would it be then the case that the face-to-face interaction will work better with people who are older or people who are not millennial? And with millennial, perhaps we need to use social media more. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, that's, again, that first aspect, you're going to reach them through social media because you don't have access to them face-to-face, unless you are a millennial. And even then, as a high school teacher with mostly seniors, and with a daughter who's a senior, and even knowing some of my ex-students that are out at college or just recently graduated, I mean, their sense of community is totally different from what I faced when I graduated high school in 1991, and what someone who graduated 10 years earlier or 20 years earlier would have thought of as community. Actually, my wife and daughter and I were just sitting around the dining room table, and they were looking at Snapchat filters and just laughing, and we were together, and we were just showing each other funny pictures. But I mean, this is what my daughter will do with her friends for hours, and each of them are sitting in their own homes, and I'll say, well, why don't you just get together and talk, or go out to the mall or something, and it's just, that's the culture, that's the way they interact. And the thing is that they are okay with interacting face to face. It's just not their primary mode of communication. And it just would take concerted and intentional effort by an entire community. It can't just be like the ASP is doing this. Like, it has to be a movement of, families and communities and, churches and local activity groups and centers, like getting people out of their house, away from their phones, and, doing things that are more meaningful.
Amar, Mario constantly expands our horizons with a Latin American perspective. So I want to ask Mario, when Amar gives us this account of seemingly cultural realities here, does that ring true in Latin America?
It does. It does. I think this is a current phenomenon all across Latin America. People who are what we may call millennial interact almost exclusively through social media. It's even TV is not a means of communication. Generally, social media is Twitter or is Facebook mainly. So things are changing rapidly. So what we understood 20 or even 15 years ago of a political campaign, interaction with people, that dynamic is completely changed over the past 8 years or 5 years. I think the world
I think of you, Mario, as someone who understands well the long-haul nature of real social change. How is it, if we have a progressively shortened attention span, that we're going to understand that real change is a long-haul, long-term effort?
Well, this is what we deal with every day in class, in public college. How to make students pay attention to a proposal who require from them more than 15 minutes of attention. So how we make them enthusiastic about reading and discussing ideas. That's a very difficult task, and that's a challenge. And so, again, and that challenge is not only here, it's, I think it's worldwide right now.
I guess Hong Kong is all of that on display right now.
Right.
Oftentimes I've read Hong Kong protesters saying, this is our only chance. If we don't do it now, it'll never happen at all. And how did they come together to protest? By way of social media. And yet, well, I understand that and appreciate that were it not for the social media, they wouldn't know how to come together or where to come together. I hope that they can see beyond this month or the next month. Well, let me shift the perspective a little bit. the party, the American Solidarity Party, has learned, hasn't it, Amar, from other third parties? We've gone out of our way to compare and contrast our efforts with third party experiences. What have you found in doing that?
Yeah, I think looking at especially the big two, the Greens and the Libertarians, I think one of the things that we've seen, and we get a lot of this. I'll get it from people who are new to the ASP that don't know of our short history, and then even don't know of the history of the Libertarians or the Greens. And they'll say, well, the Libertarians have people on many ballots and so forth, and I'll say, well, they've been around since the 70s. That's a long time, so it wasn't like overnight, it was a sensation. And then even when they have big candidates that come out of their group at the national level, they usually have big followings ahead of time. There's going to be funding, or the Greens, like Ralph Nader. He was a celebrity before he started, running for president. So I think some of these things that you look at with the third parties and people trying to make comparison with us as a third party, I think we have to kind of ignore that other stuff as noise, and the one thing that we have gotten a lot of is that the third parties are mostly successful at local campaigns, and we obviously have had a few candidates here and there, but since the Mike Matron campaign in 2016, we haven't had like a whole upswell of activity. So I think, one of my perspective as my second year on the national committee runs out in June, is that you're going to see, like this month, I'm not sure if you've seen us kind of post that my goal for this month with Brian is to have our big fundraiser and hopefully have enough funding so that he can do the campaigning he wants to do and has time for next year, so that he can get around the country and not have to constantly be, looking for members or friends to crash, with, on the campaign trail. He'll have that funding. And then also to kick off January and the Marches for Life and the different rallies that are around the country, that's our December goal, right? And then after that January, and actually with that January set of events, really launch into trying to make local groups active so that, when 2020 comes, and I'm not sure what you guys think about this, but this is my strong perspective on this, and I think I'll be saying this a lot if I get interviews and so forth, is that in 2020, two things are going to happen. If President Trump wins again, then the Republicans are up for grabs in 2024. If he loses in 2020, the Republicans are up for grabs immediately, because what this entire presidency has done has kind of forced people to like pick a side. For people that are not like us, who said, no, we refuse to do that, and we're going to pick a better way, even if can't win, but most people, even people that are sympathetic to us. I mean, I have friends who are like, oh, I love that, your platform and your party, but I'm definitely voting Trump, or I'm definitely voting against Trump the Democratic candidate because, Brian doesn't have a chance or whatever. But they've picked that side already because of the viciousness of our climate. But there's not going to be another Trump, and that's what I tell my Republican friends. Once that's over, then like you were saying, that Hong Kong, hopefully the protesters know that there is a light after the end of this month, and that Republicans, there is life after Trump. But if you just cling to this mentality, this nationalistic, just yell at them louder and Twitter harder mentality, it's not going to get us to a common good.
I don't think so. I think you're absolutely right. Now, of late, but it happens, it seems like every other 6 weeks, the party has gotten some good media attention, and yet the media attention has suggested somehow that this is a religious party. And you yourself, in part, came to the party because of deep Christian principles.
Mm-hmm.
What are the difficulties that we face if we're written off as, if you're religious, you might even want to consider the American Solidarity Party, and that's tagged in somewhere or other. We get mentioned, but we don't get mentioned as we would like to be mentioned. So could you address that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the things that is fascinating to me is certain presumptions in our culture that act like in a post-Christian society, some of the elements that weren't religiously based, but definitely came from a moral, ethical perspective of Judeo-Christian history, like that those fundamental understandings will just exist, even in a different kind of political environment. So an example I'll give you, I have some friends, non-Christian friends, who are interested in the American Solidarity Party, and when I talk about certain Christian principles and I'll talk about distributism, they're fascinated by distributism, but they're like, well, why does there have to be, like, why is there any moral component to that? And not necessarily even a Christian moral component, but just the fact that there is this aspect of good, the common good. When you say it's the common good, you are implying a morality, and you don't have to be a Christian to appreciate that. So there's lots of principles that we base our platform ideas on that can be appreciated by people of any faith, or even by people of no faith, but people who can understand that common sacrifice and responsibility to each other is necessary in a world where right now, like kind of that libertine idea of freedom is starting to trump everything. Yeah, sorry, pardon the expression, right? But if I'm,
I would encourage that.
Right, but that's what you hear a lot of. It's like, well, I should have the complete freedom to do this or that, and from both sides, and I think a lot of times I'll challenge Republicans with, well, you are a liberal. Like, I'm not a liberal, and I don't believe in these liberal things, what they would quote call liberal. But I'm like, well, you believe in freedom from taxes. You believe, like some people will say, taxation is theft, for example. And I say, making yourself free from your neighbor and all ties and responsibilities that you have, even though like loving your neighbor as yourself is a quote Christian ideal, it doesn't require faith in Christ to appreciate why that leads us to the common good. And I think that's the response that we all have to, as party members, be good at. And we have non-Christians in the party. And my parents, who are Hindu, are they know what I'm up to, and they look at that and say, yeah, that's how things were in India. You took care of each other in the small farming communities they both came from. And they grew up in the 50s in kind of poverty, I would say, like what you would call definitely abject poverty in the United States. People had what they needed because they loved their neighbor as themselves. You were part of the extended family, even if you had no blood relation. That was
I have a daughter-in-law who's a Hindu from Malaysia.
Okay.
And it's real clear that she has a strong sense of family. And, well, you've heard the expression, grace builds on nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is that our principles don't require a creed to a particular faith, but they do, I mean, for us, they do require that you put aside your selfishness, the natural selfishness that human beings have, to understand that community and the political, schema of things, that the best way that the politics can proceed is through that understanding that we are responsible for each other, and that what's best for my neighbor will end up being what's best for me.
Mario, Christopher, thoughts so far?
Oh, I have a question. You talk about we need to avoid selfishness or self-interest, and we are not libertarians, and so on. What is the role of money in the campaign?
Yes, I mean, there's something you just can't avoid. I think, I made the first post, the first appeal just the other day, and the name of the December campaign is 10K before New Year's Day. If we can get $10,000 for the campaign, I think that would, really put Brian's planning in a comfortable place for 2020. And for myself, I mean, I have school until June and a flexible summer, so maybe I can go out, and that would give me a chance to fly out to where Brian's at and support him on the campaign trail a little bit as well. And there's just no way around that. I mean, the reality of a completely electronic campaign and its effectiveness for creating ground communities, and I think, like as I said, as I finish my 2 years on the national committee, one thing I would really like to see is that we finally can transfer our activities into local settings, and have enough people who are in communities, ASP communities around the country that can move forward into 2022 and have, political activity on the local scale. And money is required for us to get physically and talk to people, because I think the value of shaking hands and breaking bread with people in their neighborhoods and bearing witness that this is more than just a Facebook group that every 4 years is going to come out and, tout high principles and then move on. It's going to be critical that we can spend some money to get, and then, obviously there's the physical, flyers and buttons and bumper stickers and all those kind of things that are part and parcel of a political campaign.
What a contrast. $10,000 by New Year's Day?
Yes.
10K by New Year's Day, and in his first week as a full-out candidate, in his first week, Bloomberg spent over $60 million on publicity.
Right.
This is David and Goliath all over again.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the equation, and none of us have gotten into this lightly. Every now and then I'll have a new party member that'll reach out after they join, and they'll say, hey, this party is great, and how do I get involved in all these things? And they basically expect a duopoly level machine, that's in place. And actually, I mean, just this, being part of the national committee and kind of researching these things, the biggest obstacle that I'm not sure how many of your listeners understand of the political system is the actual professional class, the political class that exists. And by professional, I mean people make a living doing this. I don't make a living, off of my involvement in the American Solidarity Party. No one does. But when you have two parties that, full-time have, I don't know how many employees they each have, right? Not to mention campaign staffs that get employed along the way. But I'm just talking day in and day out, secretaries and writers and accountants and lawyers, especially lawyers, on staff to make it harder for anybody else to be involved. It is fair that we call them the duopoly.
Yes, one of the ominous signs that Kamala Harris was going under 3-4 days back, campaign operative, key figure, lured away by Mayor Bloomberg.
Oh.
So when that
I wonder how they did that.
happened, when the cannibalization
right.
becomes visible, you know that there are deep problems.
Right. Well, and I'll tell you that the mercenary aspect of that professional political class, that a lot of these consultants and ad managers and technical experts or so forth, they're hired guns. So if you offer them more, or you offer them a seat at the table or whatever the offer might have been, hopefully it was on the up and up, but still monetary or power based. I mean, that just we can't compete with that. We have to go purely on principle and count on the passion of our members.
Is the antithesis of populism in the proper sense of the term.
Correct.
The ironies and the contradictions of political experience today are just extraordinary. I can remember once having Robert Dornan, longtime congressman from Orange County, come and speak to one of my classes, a seminar on politics, political theory. I don't believe there is such a thing as political science, but at any rate, when Dornan came, the question got around finally to money, and here's Dornan, who was hardly supported by ordinary workers, saying everything is just polluted by money, that we couldn't begin to imagine the influence of money. And, all right, David and Goliath, we can't begin to imagine it, but we certainly can call it out. We certainly can call it out. Mario, how does it work with Latin American politics? Money plays the same hideous role?
That's a good question. I think it does, and it does even more lately. If you just examine the history of some countries, imagine 1960s, 70s, or 60s in Chile. Eduardo Frei was a senator. He was modest means. He was a lawyer. And so he didn't have the money to run what we may call a national campaign. So they did with a lot of work, and you see now the president of Chile, he's a millionaire. He's owner of a aircraft company and many other industries. So he funded his own campaign. The same thing you can say about the president of Argentina. He's a millionaire. The same thing you can say about the president of Paraguay. So generally, over the past 15, 20 years, money began playing a crucial role in politics. And I think it's proportional to a process which is very interesting when ideologies among political parties become less relevant, then the factor of money began playing a big role. And so today you have many people who are, yes, defending democracy and all that, but generally based upon their self-interest and free market capitalism and all that, but not necessarily because they have a proposal, they have a project, they have an ideology in general terms. So unfortunately, that idea of money in politics has been influential in Latin America as well.
There's a yet another irony when a billionaire decides to run for office. Someone is always ready to say, well, he or she might not be so bad after all. Such a person won't be tempted by corruption. And you want to say, how did such a person become such a person in the first place? Oh, well. Now, here's a nuts and bolts thing, and it's every bit as nuts and bolts as money, but it's far more legitimate. There is this whole question of getting the Brian Carrol, Amar Patel ticket on the ballot in as many states as possible. How does that work, Amar? How does that go? What is required?
Well, I mean, there's so many different rules. It's another wonderful case of the duopoly making things, and from our perspective, unnecessarily difficult to get things done. But from their perspective, to keep power, it's necessary, right? So these are obstacles that many states have put in place. The balloting rules are decided by the state legislators. So what is true for one state, for example, my own state of Illinois, the percentage that you have to have of signatures, it's a percentage of how many people voted in the last gubernatorial election, and I think the number of signatures we need this time would be over 100,000. And so with the amount of volunteers that we have, it's an unreachable number. The Libertarians and Greens, with having many more volunteers, barely are able to get on during presidential campaigns for statewide elections. So, then you have states that it just requires you to pay a fee, like $1,000, and then make sure you have enough electors that have signed to agree to be, representative of the Carrol Patel ticket. So, if people are interested, if you hear this and you're like, oh, I would maybe be interested in how that works in my own state, Desmond Silvera has done a great job as the organizer of the ballot access committees to kind of target the states where it's actual ballot access, where Brian and my name will appear on the ticket, and get volunteers in that state, get some organization already. Even though most signature processes don't start for a while for the official state office being open, there's just a myriad of different things that need to be done at all these different states. So people who are interested, definitely let us know. You can email admin, or if Desmond, you can email him, or get the party page. You can definitely reach out to them in multiple different ways, and we'll get you plugged in.
Here in California, we only need 70,000 signatures.
Right, exactly.
Heck. Now, do the devilish duopolists ever provide any plausible justification for these horribly high hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of justification for, trying to weed out the nutcases, since, if they have a primary situation for the Democrats and the Republicans in a lot of the states that are, close primaries for that particular party, if you kind of made it really accessible, then you would have to open primaries for the Libertarians and the Greens and so forth. which would just add more work, and probably more confusion, and maybe they're being very, friendly to the voter to not confuse them over all of these, strange parties that could be out there, that you'd have a ballot that has, 40 names on it. And then you'd risk the chance that people would vote for somebody else by accident. Heaven forbid,
Yeah, they have a short attention span when they get into the ballot box.
Right.
Right. All right. Now let's look a little bit ahead here. You've spoken about how you're going to have some time come summer,
Mm-hmm.
and some other people have some extra time. Suppose it's around the time of the major party, the devilish duopolists, their conventions. Where do you think our party, the American Solidarity Party, where do you think, soberly think, on Antique Roadshow, they give you these conservative prices.
Right.
Where do you think the party's going to be around the time of the conventions? Now, an awful lot of people who don't pay much attention, or at least as little attention as they can to politics, do perk up around the time of the conventions. Where do you think we'll be?
I looked back at some of the data from 2016, and I mean, you'd think that the major party conventions would get a lot of people activated into politics, and obviously the news and the news media, they're going to be running, in the news cycle. It'll be fresh in the news cycle every night, around the convention time. But when I look at like our own party enrollment, there was a great influx in October, and before that, there really wasn't much activity. And when I think about my own coworkers who are very casually political, in the conversations, no one even spoke about 2016 until mid-October.
Well, let's say this then. Where's the party going to be in mid-October?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting thing. I think what we want to do, as Brian and I would really like to have, is just a lot of, for the social media aspect, a lot of posts that people, if they stumble across the campaign and they go, oh, what's this? They can scroll through and just see a lot of activity and, very well-designed and principled material explaining what we're about, so that if people, and kind of the mindset of, don't fall for this, you have to pick the lesser of two evils. If you believe in something, stand for it. And to give people that option, that if we never make a stand and we always go by, well, I can't let this person, candidate A or candidate B win because that'll be the end of the world. Well, people said that about President Trump, and I don't like the guy, but it's not the end of the world. We're still talking about what's going to happen in 2020. I mean, we're going to get around the corner, and we're going to make it to 2020 as a country, and the place isn't burning down. So, and then when I hear Christians say this, I'm like, you've forgotten we've been around for over 2,000 years now, and we're still here, and there's been much worse than as bad as we think it is in our political discourse. The faith and nations that have had the faith have faced much worse in the last 2,000 years than President Trump, or if it was Hillary Clinton. I mean, people need to know their history and just what has happened.
All right, Mario.
So, yeah. Well, following this optimistic outlook, I think. I have a question. Where do you see our party 5 years from now?
Yeah, that's like the greatest question. I think people have been talking about this, and it really depends on what the grassroots want, right? The people on the ground. I mean, I feel like there are, deep down, people are happy with the ability to be principled. Some people are. Like, there's a certain population of people that's what they want more than anything else, is to be able to say, at the end of the day, I can look at myself in the mirror and say that I have made the principled stand. And so when I kiss my kids goodnight, I do it with a clean heart, right? And so just to have the party here, that's enough for them. And that's good for me, but it's not all enough for me. Like, I feel like I have, we talked about my tech skills and just having other tangible skills. I feel like there's a lot of people in the party who should be running for office, and should be out there using those skills and our collaborative power, working together to make a difference in the public square. So really what will, I can't say I can predict that. The crystal ball, is very opaque to me, because I don't know what the response is going to be. At this point, very early in the campaign, it's very early in the campaign. I don't know what I expected. There's been a lot of, people have donated money, they've bought T-shirts, a lot of people have volunteered time, and I didn't really put expectations in this soon because I was well aware that a year away, people aren't all falling over themselves to get involved in politics yet. But, if we get to next, August and September and people just don't have the passion, to make this fight, because it is a requirement, it is a time requirement. It is a emotional requirement, to a large extent, to just get back up and keep fighting, that I can't really say what it's going to be like. One thing I feel pretty confident in is the ground that we've staked in the consistent life, distributist, Christian democratic, those principles together. Like, no one else is even close to standing for those things. And I see glimpses around the country. I mean, most recently, Senator Marco Rubio has been talking about, common good capitalism.
Right.
I'm like, dude, you're like just one step away from saying distributist. Just go out there and make some changes and take, that step. I mean, obviously, it would make him less viable as a Republican, but those are the things that, if we keep our principled stand, what we want to do is make people eventually take notice, and even if they're Republican or Democrat, and they don't go all the way, those are the changes that you want to see culturally that could eventually lead us to have more membership and, win local elections and build a movement.
So get involved, stay involved, think long term, know what's going on, talk to people. All of that matters immensely. Pull the local communities together. You mentioned principles. We always end with a gospel for the day, so we'll be ending on a level even higher than principles. But before we get to that, I want to speak on what could I call it, a hyper-realistic note. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, you know about math and probability and so forth and so on. Suppose I'm talking to somebody here in California, and I think the same is going to be the case for you in Illinois and for Mario in Kansas. Suppose somebody says, I don't want to waste my vote. One of the first things that comes to my mind, highly principled as I am, is, sir or madam, do you actually think that your vote is going to decide who wins? If so, why in the world would you ever think that? I mean, if you lived in Podunkville and the contest was for the dog catcher, yeah, it'd be pretty realistic. But if you live in California, your one vote is going to make, if you vote for one of the major parties, your vote is going to make no difference whatsoever. None. Less than none, if there were anything less than none. On the other hand, if you vote for the American Solidarity Party, you're going to, if you tell people you voted for the American Solidarity Party, make a little bit of a difference. You will make a little bit of a difference. And people will begin to wonder, well, why would you do that? And you can open the way for a discussion. So in a country of 330 million and counting people, very rarely does anybody's one vote make a difference. But if it is going to make a difference, you ought to vote for something that's right, as opposed to something that's expedient, and then explain why you voted the way you did. Don't keep it under a bushel. Let your little light shine. It is a little light, but let it shine. Now, have I got the numbers wrong somewhere in that?
No, it sounds good.
Well, dang. I'll try that out then.
Excellent. Yes.
We have 17 people to dinner every Sunday, so I'm going to try it out. Actually, I've tried it out several times, and they don't want me to try out anything more at all, but too bad. They're going to eat for free. They can listen. Well, enough of that. We always end with the gospel for the day. And today, it's from St. Luke. Jesus rejoiced in the Holy Spirit and said, I give you praise, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to the childlike. Yes, Father, such has been your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father. No one knows who the Son is except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. Turning to the disciples in private, he said, Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I say to you, many prophets and kings desired to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. The Gospel of the Lord. Come, Lord Jesus, come.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.